With 2020 coming to an end, I thought I'd put together this little video reflecting on a year which can only be described as a hurricane. It came, it hit us with the unexpected, and now it's leaving us for a big old cleanup in 2021. But with such a turbulent year, came a lot of lessons. It was Winston Churchill that once said, "Never waste a good crisis." And there were some key lessons this year that we can learn from. So as we farewell 2020, I'm going to share with you some of the lessons that I learned throughout this year. Hello guys, Brad here from The Guided Investor. Welcome back to the channel for another video. If you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button because I post regular videos about how you can do more with your money. And today we are reflecting on the lessons that we learned in 2020. Turning first to the stock market. Now, this is a lesson that I already knew and I already implemented, but I do think it is a very important one, so I'm going to reiterate it again for you guys. And that is, don't sell in panic. Many people sold down their superannuation and their investments in March this year. This was when the fear was at an all-time high. So shops were shutting down, everything was going into lockdown, people were madly buying toilet paper.
I just want one pack. No, not one pack.
And it really did feel like the world was ending to a certain extent. So naturally, this fear led to some rash decisions when it comes to people's investments. And if you held a bucket of diversified Australian stocks and you did sell down at the bottom in March, you would have crystallized a loss of about 32% from where it was at the start of January. And what's even worse than this is if you didn't buy back in, then you would have missed the recovery. A decision to sell leads to an equally hard decision as to when to buy back in. And if you sold based on a quantitative analysis, then there's a good chance that your money will still be in cash. Because if you have a look at market valuations and stock prices, on a historical level, they're actually still very high. But if that was the case, you would have missed out on a very speedy recovery. Since the lows in March, the Australian stock market is up around 46%. And what's even more surprising than that is if you look at the US stock market, that's up around 66% from its lows in March. So if you didn't do anything throughout the year and you simply held onto your Australian stocks from the start of January until now, your portfolio would be down roughly 0.5%. But the dividends that you got would have made up for that along the way. If you had the same with a diversified bucket of US stocks and you held them from January until now and done nothing, you would be up around 15%. Timing the market is a very difficult game. And while I encourage you to have conviction in your portfolio and make small tweaks to your portfolio, which is in line with that conviction, only a cowboy goes all in or all out. So for my clients, I actually invested an additional 10% of money into the market in the lows in March. And I wanted to do another 10%, but unfortunately it didn't drop as far as I wanted it to do to take that additional step. But not once did I sell out of growth assets and buy defensives. The old saying, buy high and sell low, really is easy in theory, but it is very difficult to put it into practice. When you turn on the TV and the media is telling you that the stock market is in meltdown and the world is ending and you're buying stocks, you do start to question your sanity. One element of the market crash that did surprise me is the sheer velocity of the market movements. Not so much on the downside, more on the upside. When markets are in free fall, they tend to fall pretty hard and fast. And there's an old saying that the stock market takes the stairs up and the elevator down. In this case, the crash took roughly 1 month from the 20th of February to the bottom of the cycle on the March 23rd. During that period, there was a day where the share market fluctuated 12% in a single day. What surprised me most was the share market recovery, and I was anticipating a U-shaped recovery. In fact, I put a video out previously in March saying that I give it about a 20% chance of a V-shaped recovery, a 70% chance of a U-shaped recovery, and a 10% chance of an L-shaped recovery. Well, so far it seems like we're having a V-shaped recovery, which is quite amazing given that there's still so many global concerns out there. The ability for markets to fall so hard and recover so quickly And for us to have a single day where the market fluctuates 12%, I believe is a result of an increase in access to trading equities. Every single person can open up a brokerage account free of charge. You can trade small amounts of money with very low brokerage costs, and you can do it all on your phone, which we all have with us pretty much 24/7 these days. So what this means is that retail investors these days can band together and actually push the market in certain ways. Before, it just used to be institutional investors doing most of the market movements. But in this day and age, the retail investor has a bit of weight behind them. And having shorter market cycles means that if you want to make the most of an opportunity, you got to get in quick and get it done, because there's a good chance otherwise that you'd miss out. This stock market crash has seen an unprecedented use of fiscal and monetary policy from governments and central banks around the world. Not to mention an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented. The Australian government has pumped $507 billion via way of stimulus into the Australian economy. And the US economy makes this look like pocket change because they've done $6.5 trillion in stimulus. And they're not done yet. The US government just announced another $900 billion worth of stimulus in the pipeline. The use of such enormous amounts of stimulus really is starting to test some of the more extreme economic theories out there, like modern monetary theory and universal basic income. Traditionally, it was thought that with this amount of stimulus and this amount of money printing, that inflation is going to take control and it's going to ruin the economy. But at the moment, that just seems like a myth because governments are trying to get a little bit of inflation and it's just not happening. So with inflation a non-issue, or at least for now, and with governments and central banks willing to do whatever it takes, it really does de-risk investing to a certain extent. Because if there is a significant drop in asset prices as a whole, at the moment we can basically bank on that the governments and central banks will step in and throw money at the problem. And it's pretty funny to watch because this has basically turned bad news into good news. As soon as there is bad data which is released, like let's say there is a negative GDP figure, normally this would cause stock prices to fall. But in this stock market crash, it's actually done the opposite because, not all the time, but sometimes, because bad news means more stimulus. And at the moment, investors are treating stimulus a bit like cocaine. They just absolutely love it and they're just waiting for the next hit. And so if there's any chance of additional stimulus, investors are going to buy back in. But the key takeaway from this is that as an investor, be very careful about betting against governments and the central banks. Because at the end of the day, if they want something to happen, they basically have a limitless balance sheet which they can throw at it. So they're very likely to hit their target. There's nothing like a good old-fashioned lockdown to remind us of the value of an emergency fund. Here in Australia, at the peak, we hit 7.5% unemployment, and losing your job really is a scary thing to go to because it creates a lot of uncertainty in your life. But something that you all can do to ease this stress is to have an emergency fund. Now, I typically recommend an emergency fund of 3 months of gross income. And having that level of money sitting there in cash is just a comfort barrier because you know that if you lose your job, you can still meet mortgage repayments, you can still put food on the table, all while you're looking for a new job or assessing your options for government support. Sometimes it's very easy to overlook the importance of an emergency fund because, let's face it, it's a little bit boring. There's nothing exciting about holding a large sum of money in cash. And also, it can seem like an opportunity wasted, having that much money not doing anything for you. But a crisis like this one does show us the importance of an emergency fund because it provides that level of comfort and financial security. Most of the government's response to COVID-19 was pretty good. They managed to get us out of recession by the year's end. Employment is increasing again, the stock market is up, And in most states, property prices are increasing as well. This is a pretty good way to end the year, particularly for policies that were rolled out in the heat of the moment. But one policy that I fundamentally disagree with was the ability to withdraw money from your superannuation. Over $35 billion was withdrawn from superannuation under the COVID-19 early release scheme. And I'm guessing this has something to do with the reason why cars are selling like hotcakes. And the latest one I heard is that there is a waiting list for jet skis. All of this consumption, or a lot of this consumption, is being funded from retirement savings. And sure, all this consumption is good for the economy, but this is very short-term thinking. With this amount taken out of the superannuation system, people are going to have a lot less at retirement. Just remember that if you withdrew $20,000 today, and you otherwise could have earned a steady 6% per annum on that money, that $20,000 today is worth $120,452 in 30 years' time. But obviously, a lot of people don't think the same way I do, and they will take that short-term enjoyment over that long-term financial security. And I'm not sure if this is because people have a lack of faith in the superannuation system, or maybe they don't understand exactly how super works. But one thing that this has taught me is that people don't really care much about their super. This one shocked me the most. I knew that asset prices could drop in value and essentially be worthless, but to trade at a negative valuation, that's a whole new kettle of fish. And we saw this with the oil price. Back in April, oil traded at a negative price for the first time in history. This basically means that producers were paying people to take their oil. And the reason is because obviously the world went in shutdown, they ran out of storage space, and to turn off the pumps would be way too costly. As an investor, if you bought a futures contract for oil, not only would your investment be worth nothing, but even worse than that, you could potentially owe money on that futures contract. This actually happened to a day trader in the US who bought 212 future contracts of oil at what he thought was US 1 cent. Turns out it was actually trading at negative $3.70, which meant that he actually owed $9 million, and they sent him a bill for that. Now, he was quite lucky and he got off the hook because the trading platform he was using didn't have the functionality to show a negative value, and so therefore the onus was put back on the platform. But that potentially could have made him bankrupt. So what lesson did I learn from negative oil prices? Well, I reckon there were two lessons. Firstly, I learned that, and I already knew this to a certain extent, but trading commodities is a very risky game. I typically prefer to invest in businesses rather than directly in commodities. And secondly, just because you think an asset is cheap doesn't mean that it can't get cheaper. If you asked me at the start of 2020, do I think oil would be worthless? I would have said no. If you told me that oil could trade negative at the start of 2020, it wouldn't have even crossed my mind. So be very careful about what you invest in. Overall, 2020 has been a year that we will not forget. It has potentially changed the way we live and the way we work for the rest of our lives. But if I had to take one key takeaway from 2020, it's that having a financial plan is so important. As time goes on, we're going to encounter more of these events which throws us off course. And we can't control what happens to stock prices, we can't control what happens to markets, we can't control what the government does or the central banks do, we can't control any of that. But what we can control is how we react to it. And if we always sit back, have our financial plan on hand, have a long-term view on these things and continue to follow out that plan, 9.9 times out of 10, it's gonna lead you to a really good result. So make yourself a financial plan, make small tweaks to that plan as events arise, but continue to focus on the long term. But that's it for me today, guys. Thanks a lot for watching. This is my last video for 2020, so I just want to say a quick thank you for all the people that watch my videos and support the channel. I really do appreciate you guys. And I hope you all all have an awesome Christmas, and I will see you all again back here in 2021.